Good evening and welcome to another Stormgate Editor Showcase video. This time going into a deep dive into unit creation, how to create abilities and weapons, and effects such as launching missiles, damage buffs and more. This video was a request on how to create units and missiles, and how to create tower defense maps, but from the ridiculous length of the video, I had to separate the video into two parts. The tower defense section will be in the next video. There will be some parts of the video where I reference that, because I did not expect this to go on for as long as it did. And for those who are patient enough to watch this, I've tried to go into just enough details to hopefully make the information conveyed here be somewhat compatible with similar editors and computer programming in general, if you want to try to make video games yourself in the future. But hopefully the information on the screen here will give you compartmentalized information and timestamps about what to expect from the video if you want to skip certain sections. And I figured I could also address the recent news about the Stormgate servers. In the coming PTR patch, Stormgate will be testing offline play because an AI slop company has purchased the company Hatura, which Stormgate was dependent on, and a reminder that you don't hate AI slop enough. This will mean that, hopefully only temporarily, you will be limited to single player maps if I understand it correctly, unless the Stormgate team manages to let you play with your friends without a server. Well, this is unpleasant news. You will hopefully still be able to make single player maps. If you want any additional clarification or have any requests, then feel free to comment so in the comment section. Okay, now let's get started. First thing first, I'm just going to quickly delete this here. It's not something I'll need for the moment. And now, to create a unit, you'll be using unit data to create most of your unit. This is how you create all of your units. If you, for instance, just want to change small bits of a unit by making copies of it, then you can go into the ID and use the duplicate archetype here, so that or if you have the full name, then you can type it manually, but you'll be using copy and the duplicate archetype there. So now you have a unit if you want to just change something quickly. But I'll be teaching you how to change something from scratch instead. So I'll create a new unit data and demonstration unit. This is not the actual name of the unit itself. It is just something in the editor to make it easier for you to read. You will be changing the unit's actual name in the parameters there. And for most of the units you will be using unit data. There are other things, but this will primarily be what you will be using for structures and units. And now, first thing first, how do you change the model of a unit? This will be done with the Unreal actor. Here, for instance, I want to create give it a Lancer model. So now here you can see I have a Lancer, but you'll be noticing a hub level Lancer. This is the special unit that is used in the campaign hub where you select missions, and not the actual Lancer unit itself. The Lancer has an older placeholder named Heavy Melee. So, but I'll quickly showcase what the Lancer model Lancer campaign model looks like. This is standing idly by in the campaign hub model, not the actual model I'm looking for. So also be mindful that you do not use with the _C I'm not sure if this is an old iteration or something, but if you try to use these with an underscore C in the end, then you will get an error message that it will not work. So now let's see. Now you have the real deal, the actual unit model. So now let's continue. And for the unit button, this will be if you have multiple units selected and select all of them, then in the command code the unit button will be representing what they will actually be looking like in when you see 1, 2, 3, 4 for instance, along with all the other things that's selected. So just for demonstration, I'll be using the brute model instead. This so that when I select them, you will see a brute instead, just for demonstration purposes. And now this is a little bit important thing here. Starting snow tags. This will be determining what kind of unit you will be using, what type of unit it will be. So for instance, height, plane, air or ground. If you do not have one of these, then I'm not really sure what it is, but if you have a weapon that only attacks air or only attacks ground, then neither of those will be able to attack the demonstration unit there. So I'll be setting this to a ground unit and an entity unit as well. It does have a couple of other things, such as, for instance, heavy and light, for instance. These are also determined here, or if it's a worker, for instance. And I believe that's all of what I need for now. And for the units that has a turret, such as the Atlas, for instance, or some static defense units, such as the Celestial Armada's nodes, this will be determined here. If you do not have it, then the weapons, for instance, will be fired from the center of the unit. And traits here. This will not be an actual effector on the unit. It will be when you select a unit and you see what upgrades it has unlocked, for instance, or passive effects in the next to the command code. The traits here will be determining what this will be visually representing, but this will not be having any actual game effect. For that, you will be using buffs and behaviors. The various buffs here you'll be creating for persistent game effects that will that could potentially be removed, or different behaviors, such as having pets with the unit spawner, for instance. For actual persistent game effects, you'll be using behaviors and buffs. And weapon list. This will be determining the weapon that the unit has. So for instance, they have some different odd names, but for the sake of showcasing, I'll have a lancer weapon here. This will be creating attacking in a small line out from the unit. The weapon list here will be determining the weapon. Subgroup priority. When you have multiple units selected, then, for instance, if I have this one on 50 and something else is on 51, then the demonstration unit here will be placed ahead of the unit. So if you, for instance, have spellcaster, you want those higher in the priority in order to select them first. And flags here. This will be determining, for instance, if the unit has detection or not, or if it is passively stealth, for instance. There's not many alternatives here, but at the very least these two, or for instance, if you will not be able to control a unit, for instance, by default, you'll be using the flags here. And effects. This will be at different stages of the unit, such as when it is created, birthed for units, or constructed for structures. Or the creation, I think this is for both structures and units. Or for instance, if revenge, if these will be placed on, both of these three will be applied onto the unit when the unit is created, and that, for instance, if you wanted to explode on that, then you can create it there. Or revenge. If a unit dies, then you can have some form of effect be applied onto the killing units, such as, for instance, being able to make the unit give the other player resources, for instance, that you want, for instance, in a tower defense map. Minimap icon and minimap size. By default, a unit will be represented by a small dot on the map, but you can change this to something else, to, for instance, be representing a boss unit, for instance, that are walking around on the map. And you can change how big the icon is on the map. This can be used both for the default dot and a special unit icon representing on the map. Placed name, yes. This will be for mostly for used for hero units or boss units, in conjunction, along with the various types of triggers, which I will be showcasing later. This can be used on both by default in the editor, or for instance, in order to create a special unit. So if you want a special unit on the map that you want to have some form of interaction with the trigger, you'll be placing it here. When you edit stuff here out on the map, then this will not be changing in the editor itself here. This will be an independent unit, independent custom unit. So for instance, I can have this unit spawn with 1,000 hit point, for instance. Then this will not be affecting the other baseline units that obeys what is by default set in here. Default control group. This will be if you want to have when they have this, for instance, have this be assigned to a worker unit, for instance, in a custom map. Then you can set this to, for instance, to 1 or whatever else you want to be, for a hero unit or worker unit, for instance, in order to make it easier for players to select upgrade units if that could potentially be hard to notice. Unit footprint. This is what you will be using in order to create structures. So for instance, I have set this to 2x2, and I'm having a snap enabled. This will mean that it will be obeying the grid here. Let me enable the grid. So for instance, so that it will snap onto place. But if I want to not have this, now I'm uncertain then what this is supposed to represent then. I thought at the very least you could change it, place it wherever you want. Maybe you can't use it in the editor. But at the very least, if you have anything set to footprint, then the unit will not be able to move regardless. So you have to default it to reset if you want the unit to be able to move again. And now just give quickly something else. Ability list and ability command. For most units needs abilities to do anything. Ability list here, this represents what the unit can actually do. So for instance, you want a unit to be able to move, you need to move data and attack data in order to attack, for instance. By default for default unit you also need stop and for those who want it is also hold position. These are the four default abilities that all units have. Structures don't need these, but this is for units that can move. And command list. This will be, and a command list. This will be representing when you select a unit and you will be seeing the 10 abilities in the corner. This list here will be determining what will be in that section of the map. So for instance, I want to have an attack ability. Then this will be representing the ability itself, and this will be the button, the description and what the button will look like. And command index, this is something a little bit more complicated that I will be showcasing later, but for most close to every spell node you will be setting this to 0. And row and slot here. For the row here, this will be the vertical if it is in the first section or in the second section. Just gonna check something quickly. Yes, for the row here, for the default attack, stop, hold and patrol and hold position and stop there. This will be on the second row will be the top one. And the slot here will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, starting from 1 and going to 5. So this will be the default set to 1 and another one, setting the second one stop button to this second here. I'm not sure. Yes, I can showcase this as well for the patrol button. This will be under move data, but this will be under command index 1. I'm not sure why both of these are under the ability move data, but at the very least, no, you will be able to find this here under move data in command index 1 for patrol. I just needed to quickly get the ability in command indexed in order to showcase what comes next. And now for the unit's movement. If you want to have an unit slowly start to gradually gain movement, such with, for instance, aerial units, or slow boss units, then you can have acceleration and deceleration. But you can also just have this set to, both of these parameters set to 0 and try to change it if you want it to be a little bit more organic movement. well, test it, please. And condition here. For ground units, for instance, most units will have ground, but you also have a ground toll, for instance. This is a special one that it used to have for having the weaver, for instance. This used to be a toll unit that units could be walking under, and it could be walking up cliffs. So if you want to have a special unit with a toll feature, but not necessarily air, you have this option as well. And lock facing. This will be for instance, structures. If you want where's the sentry post, I think it is. The sentry post here, for instance, you want this to have the ability to attack units. Then and without having this spin around and attacking, you can have this to lock facing so that it can fire without turning. And pathing mode. This will be for how the unit will be moving around. So for instance, this will be for how the unit will be traveling around on the map. For instance, if I for instance want to create a whole bunch of water here, if I for instance wanted to create on a water path here that unit was not supposed to be able to walk through, then I could potentially have a tall units be able to walk through here and air units, but not ground units. And move turning. This is the turn radius and movement radius. These are two things that to some extent accomplishes the same. If you want to have turn without slowing, for instance, then if you want to have turning without slowing, then turning radius will be determining how big of a radius the unit needs to travel in order to turn. So for instance, if I want order the units to move here and I have having a radius of 4, then the unit will be having to move around like this. But if I did not have turn without slowing enabled, then the unit could be decelerate and over the course of 2 seconds, 4 seconds turn around. If you want to have a fancy aerial unit that's flying and quick and moving quickly, you can use the turn radius. But if you want to have an unit that a little bit more organically slows down and over a fixed amount of time, you will be using moving turn. Also for stationary turn period. This will be something you can use for boss unit or static defense. With stationary turn, the unit will be slowly turning around if it is standing still to find its new target or track units. So that is the 3 separating things from moving turn, and stationary turn. And now let's see. Inner and outer radius. Also I can show you this one. Name. This parameter here will be dictating the name of the actual unit. The unit has now received its name, demonstration unit. This is where you'll be determining what the unit is actually called in the game. Now, inner and outer radius. This is something that will be useful for a tower defense construction. Outer radius. This will be the how separate, how close you can get to an unit. But inner radius. This will be for structures and walls. So you can only get so close to a wall or so close to a structure. So now, for instance, for the demonstration unit, I'm going to give it an separate units by 1 and an inner radius for structures to 4. And now let's see how. Now let's showcase this, what it will be looking like. Also, I forgot something really important as well. The actual speed itself. This is determined here. So for instance, I want to have a movement speed of 5. This will be determining the speed of the unit itself. Now we're in the game, and as now we can see, I'm going very, very closely to, and it will interacting with the unit. It will be far more than the default 0.375 that most units have, at the very least medium units have. But now for this with the range 4 from structures and walls. Yeah, I cannot go closer anything to this due to the inner radius of the unit. But this one with only 0.3 can go at the very least a great deal closer. And it as you can see, it could potentially having some interacting a little bit oddly because I might change something with. At the very least, this you can set this to outer radius to 0, for instance. Outer radius to 0, and it will not be interacting with the other units, or turn off, and retain the inner radius to a small amount, so that you can create a labyrinth for your tower defense pathways. Also be mindful when you're initially creating a unit that you need to set an ability move in order to move a unit, or else you will not be able to move the unit. Okay, now that those two are out of the way. Shield, health, and energy. This will be determining the amount of health the unit will be starting with and the maximum amount. You can set these to equal, or you can set the maximum to greater, but if maximum is greater than starting, then the starting will be going back to starting will go back to what the maximum is. And you can set a regeneration here as well. For instance, if you want to have this to live for only a certain amount of time, then you can set this to a negative value so that it will organically die over time, or a plus if you wanted to regenerate health over time. And a shield. This is entirely optional, but you can set this to 0 if you don't want to have any shield. And energy types. Energy here. This is for instance where most units starts with 200 but has a maximum of 200 but only start with 50. Yeah, energy type here. I had it, just missed it. The energy type, you can for instance have animus instead as well, which I think is what the Infernals are using. And armor, this will be determining how much armor the unit has. And armor icon and armor name, this will be when you're hovering or when you select an unit and you hover over to see how much armor it has. This will be indicating the name of the armor. And the armor icon, this will be if you want to have something special icon for it that most units has, then you can set this to an icon here of your own choosing. And vision radius, this will be determining how far the unit can see. I think by default most units has a vision range of 11 or 10, I think, but you can determining how much you want it to be here. And the vision height as well. If you wanted to be able to see up cliffs, for instance, such as with tall ground units. And vitals force height. This can be used if you want to have a hidden unit or something that is a little bit more difficult to see, such as something hidden in a pool here, for instance. Then you can use vitals force height to not showcase any hit point bar, for instance. And the build cost and build time. A build time, this will be determining for construction time and for morphing time. And I don't think this will be determining if you summon a new unit, but for construction and morphing, the timer is determined here. And building cost. The resource A is Luminite and resource B is Ethereum. So if you construct a new unit, then this will be determining the price. And if you morph a unit as well, if you have a unit with an 50 and morph it to a unit with an 100 Luminite, then the morphing cost will be 100 to change it to a unit. But if you change it back to the original unit, then you will, with 50 units, then you will be refunded 50 Luminite. And the fidget here, this won't be used much for tower defense, but if in most other RTS games, then units, when they have been idle for a while, then they will be turning around in different units to look a little bit more organic, which most units does not have in Stormgate. But you can set this here to the timer of how frequent this will be happening here if you so desire. And the height here, this is for aerial unit. If I, for instance, currently this won't be, they are ground units, but if I, for instance, set this to 2, then this will will not become a flying unit, but this is how far up above the ground it will be. I'll be setting this back to 0, and it will be on the ground again. Supply and cost and add. Cost, this will be how much you will need in order to construct or train a unit. And add, this will be for supply structures, for instance. A supply unit that provides provides 10 supply, for instance, so long as it exists. You can have both of these. So it will cost 2 supply to train or construct a unit, and it will be providing 10 when it is completed. And the same here with the power for that you have for Celestial Armada units on the alternative. And also here is determined SearchRadius. I'm not sure if this necessarily needs to be on a structure or not, but at the very least here it is. And a cargo size for transport units, how much supply the unit should take. And responses here. This will be a little bit more complicated, but for instance, when the Lancer, for instance, when it takes damage, it will by default subtract 2 damage from the damage taken. This will be one of the responses. You can have things for when you're healed, for instance, or death in order to prevent the unit from dying. I believe this will be. Oh wait. This will be fatal here, but at the very least that is what the response parameter will be. And that at very least is the basics for how to create a unit from scratch. And now we'll go into other details for creating weapons and other spells. First thing first, TurretData. This is the non-essential when you select a unit and see what has been upgraded or not. This will be determined here. For instance, the Scout by default has its detect invisible units icon here, but the upgrade for damage, this is hidden behind a requirement. This again will just be putting on small icon that indicates that you've not unlocked it yet. But this again is just cosmetic to inform the player, it doesn't have any actual game effect. TurretData. This will be determining you can create you can determine how quickly the turret of a unit spins around, for instance, or having it idle about. You can change this with the TurretData here. And now for actual more gameplay relevant related. LaunchProjectile. This will be for if you create when a unit fires a projectile that does not instantly hit a target, you will be using a LaunchProjectile here. This is for both spells and weapons. And it only has one based on here, so don't concern yourself for that. Okay, so first thing first, the projectile. This will be determining what the projectile actually will look like. Yeah, I think Imp Weapon Missile. This, for instance, is the small fireball that Imp fires. So now when this is fired, this is what a graphical effect will look like when it fires at the target. And impact effects. This will be when a unit hits a target. This will be small graphical effect that will be played when it finally reaches its target. And this is one less used effect. This will be when the projectile is initially fired. You can have an effect to play around the unit itself, or from wherever the projectile is launched from. And any montage and fallback unit. Any montage, these two will be used for if you want the unit to fire itself, in order to have it, if you want to have it leap onto a target or dash across the screen. And you will need an fallback unit as well for this. I have made a unit dedicated to these two in order to showcase how this works, but at the very least this is the two that you will be using. Most of the time I'll be just using War's Dark Speed and I think the fallback being to the caster, but this is something that you will be rarely using. Will not be used if you use an ordinary shoot an object at a target. Now for flanks. This will be, I believe, if you want for instance, if you want to have the launching the unit itself, you will be using this to find a spot to land somewhere that is not already occupied. And the reserve, this means that if you for instance have a whole load of units and they're all trying to leap onto the target, and each of them will reserving a spot so that you do not have them all clump up unnaturally with the landing spot reserve. And impact location and launch location and impact location. Most of the time you will have impact location set to target, and launch location will be from the caster itself. This will be so that to determine that when you launch, you actually launch it from the caster, and the location you want to target will be at either the weapon or the ability you're targeting, which could also include just the ground itself. For instance, if you set impact location to point, then if the unit is moving and the unit fires right now and the unit moves, then it will fire on the ground even if the target moves over here. But if it is the entity or point, then this could be used as a spell to target the ground, but if entity or point or entity you fire at a target, then it will be homing in on the target. Or you can reverse it if you want to have a spell where you have a siphon life from the target to yourself. Then you could reverse these two. And now for the Validator. This is a really complicated thing, but this will be, for instance, you can set this as a filter so that you can only target at units that does not have a certain buff, for instance, or only has a buff, for instance, an marker highlight buff, or vice versa. Or you can only be able to target units that have above 50% hit points. This is what validators will be, the purpose of validators. So that you can only fire or not be able to fire on things that matches the validator. And validator chains, this won't be, if you fire the target, then this won't be prematurely, then I believe this parameter will be prematurely cancel the projectile. If in the middle of the travel the unit takes damage below 50% hit point, then this could be used to abort the missile, for instance. Or if for instance the unit enters stealth, then the projectile will stop in its tracks. Impact effect. This won't be to, for instance, make when a missile contacts on the target. Then, for instance, if you want the target to be damaged, for instance, then you will set a damage parameter, GameEffectData parameter here. Or for instance, GameEffect ApplyBuff, if you want the missile to apply a buff onto the target. And movement, this will be the speed of the missile you can determine here, which also includes acceleration if you want to the same as the unit, if you want to have for instance 1 second before it reaches its full speed. And an impact offset, this one is a less used parameter, but this is a more esoteric thing, but I believe this will be you can have this offset it plus or minus, I believe, further away or further closer to you. Depending on whichever direction it impacts from. If, for instance, the unit is homing in and it goes over here, then, and the missile impacts from here, then I think it will go minus here and plus here if it flies in distant tracking and such. And on lob effect, this won't be if you want to have a catapult-like effect, then you can use an lob in together with the lob gravity to determine how far it will travel. And I'm not really sure what these last 3 parameters do. I'm not really sure. And range maximum. This will be if you will have a maximum distance and the unit travels further away. Then if it reaches the maximum travel period, then it will be the missile will be aborted, same as with the validator chains. And the skill shot here, this is a fancy thing that causes you to, which will if you for instance are targeting the enemy here, then the projectile, if it hits something in its path, then you can have a contact effect. You can think of the skill shot as rename this to a contact effect, then a contact effect in the middle of the path to, for instance, cause a slowing effect or damage, and is separate from the impact effect. And you can, for instance, have max targets to if you have 5 targets in its path and it hits 5 targets, then you can prematurely cancel it before it hits the target. If you want to have a special ability, for instance. And the width here, this will be determining how chunky the missile is. It is not determined by the graphical model of the projectile itself, but the width here. So for instance, I set this to a width of 2, then if it isn't within a distance of 2, it will still be hit. And a target filter and validator here. For instance, if you want to not hit your own units, for instance, you can filter that out here. And on periodic here, this will be creating almost the same as the skill shot, but this will be a pulsating effect. So if you want to have a DamageRadius, for instance, it will be every 0.3 second, it will be pulsing and repeatedly damage an unit. So for instance, it will be 0.3, 0.3, 0.3. It will hit potentially 3 times the same target, unlike the skill shot that only hits the same target once. That is what the periodic will do. Next up, some of how to create an basic ability, and staged ability. And this has different parameters, but basically all of these you can simply ignore. The only relevant here is the StagedAbility data. So, first thing first, the Unreal component. This will be dictating the casting animation of the ability. Some units has multiple casting animations, such as the Animancer. I found a better example to demonstrate is the Hexen spellcaster, for instance. Here. The Hexen spellcaster, for instance, has miasma, which has a special start. So you can go into find the unit and the spell it has in its ability list, and go into navigate here to find the respective animations that certain spells has. So that is for different units. This is where you find unit spell animations for the unit itself when it casts a spell or channel it. And the turret here, this is an alternative. If you want instead of turning the unit itself, you can have the turret cast the spell for the unit. And casting EFBX, this will be a small particle effect that you can play from the caster. From having different particle effects which will be played from the caster towards the direction that you're casting. And you can have some small amount of persistent animation time for certain effects as well, if you want to make it extra sparkly. And range visualizer, this will help you. This, I believe, is this will give you a small circle around the caster to showcase how far the spell can be casted away from the caster. Or you can alternatively turn it off as well with the range indicator, which is the part of the range to visualize. And now we have range maximum and minimum. Range maximum is how far how far away from the caster you can cast the spell, and the minimum is an alternative if you want to not be able to cast it within a certain distance away from the within a certain parameter from the caster. And a range slope. This means that if you cast things on an unit, for instance, if you cast a spell at the maximum range and the unit goes away slightly, then there is a grace distance that you can set with the range slope to still be able to cast the spell, to complete the spell once you've casted it, if you haven't cast duration. And cast duration. This will be if you want to have a spell that is not immediately completed once you cast it. You have to, such as in MMOs, for instance, and RPGs, if you have a 2 or 3 second cast time before the spell is complete. And arc and arc stop. This is for if the unit has a stationary turning radius, for instance, on boss, and it is slowly turning, then you can have, for instance, on a 45-degree casting arc, from which you can begin casting the spell. And the arc stop. This means that once you start casting the spell and the unit is slowly turning towards it. If, for instance, I have this to a 45-degree arc stop, then it can go up to 90 degrees away from the caster before the spell is cancelled by the caster if it goes further than 90. And cast game effect. This will be what the spellcaster will actually cast. For instance, you can have an ApplyBuff, for instance, or DamageRadius to deal damage in an area, or the DamageRadius, or for instance, launch missile, in order to let the launch projectile cast its effect on impact. So cast game effect is where the actual game effect itself will be applied in the spell. And the flags here. This, I believe, means that only one spellcaster will cast the spell. For instance, if you have if a fire strike spell that deals damage in an area, and you have multiple casters, then only one will be casting them each time you cast a spell. But if you disable this, then all of them will be casting at the same time. So for instance, if you have a LaunchProjectile which casts a fireball on a target, then you can have all of them cast it on the same target if you so desire. And channeled here. This will mean that the unit will have to stand still and stop and channel the spell in order to maintain an persistent game effect persistent that also needs channeled. If you, for instance, want to have on the drain life spell or something, you will need to have channeled here and on the persistent. And here it is channeling the different parameters. If for instance this spell goes out of the spell's maximum range in arc stop, then you could disable this and keep channeling it, or you have it enabled so that it will break once you go out of the spell's arc stop. And counters attack here. The spell's casting time will be affected by the units this will affect the spell's casting time if the unit has a buff that increases or decreases attack speed with your weapons. And the preempter. This is a handy thing to if you want to cast a spell while the unit is moving. If the unit is casting if you're moving a unit and you cast a spell, then without preempt, then the unit will stop. But for instance, if you're casting a StompAbility, then the unit will stop. Or if you're casting something, for instance, like a Fire Strike spell in an area of effect spell in then you can control it with preempt here to whether or not the unit will stop in its track. And the prevent activation here. This will be if you have autocast enabled, then you cannot cast the spell, cannot manually cast the spell, but only unit can only cast it if you have autocast enabled when it does so itself. And this will have a small bar above the caster's head to progress if you have casting time enabled. This is an odd one, but a handy one. This will mean that if you have a different unit and you right-click on the spellcaster, then the spellcaster will activate it once it gets close enough. So, if for instance the Animancer here had a healing spell, and you have the worker here and a right-click, then it will go over to the caster, and once it is within range, the Animancer will cast it onto the spell onto the unit that you use to right-click the spell with. And this here, if you have a map where you have if you have a place where you cannot see, for instance, up cliffs, then or over cliffs where vision is blocked, then you can have this to require vision. And I saw something different here. The show progress. This will be showing the casting time of the spell, and the progress countdown. This will be going from 0 to 100 instead of 100 to 0 instead of vice versa. And silence. Silence, this is for as the name implies, if the unit has a buff that applies silence to the unit, then you cannot cast the spell if it is silenceable. And command cell. This will be how you apply a cooldown to one spell, how much it should cost in terms of energy or health if you so desire, or Luminite and Therium, for instance, and charges as well. If you want to have a charge spell that has 3 charges, that takes a long time to cast, but you will be able to have a small cooldown so you can rapidly cast 3 charges at a time. Then you can apply charges as well. And a requirement. This will be if you, for instance, wanted to have, you need an upgrade to in order to use it, then you can have a requirement error. And autocast. This will be for if you want to have the unit cast the spell automatically when it finds an invalid target. It has a separate validator here, so if you, for instance, want to not have, in certain cases, not autocast it on units that have less than a certain amount of hit point, for instance, and you can determine if the autocast will only be applied on the enemies or allies, for instance. And an exclusive targeting here. This, I believe, will be if you have multiple units with the same spell auto-casting, then I believe this one either be for, if you have a launch projectile that is casting a spell, then until the launch projectile has impacted on the target, then the other units that has the same spell will not auto-cast it on the same target if you have exclusive targeting on. And then range here, if you want the spell itself is, the range is dictated by the max and minimum range, but you can set this above the spell's maximum range to make the caster go towards the target if it is greater, or if it's less than maximum target, then it will not auto-cast until you get within a certain range. Such as, for instance, if you want to have a net spell to immobilize targets, then it will only cast it at a range of 3 on melee units, instead of having the spell's max range being 8, for instance. And required scan here, this will be, it's a little bit complicated, but I believe offensive will be when it is looking for enemies. So if you're attack moving or standing still, then this will automatically cast on enemies, but if it's set to none, this will be needed, I believe, for to cast it on allies, for instance, or to passively cast it when you're moving. I have a video on auto-casting spells too that goes more into details about this. And target sorter. This will be how you dictate what targets it will target, such as, for instance, distance closest. This means that the autocast will be looking for the closest target when the spell is available and cast it on that, or the furthest away, or the unit with the least or most amount of health, for instance. This is dictated by the target sort. If you don't have a target sort, then the spell will be, for some reason, always be looking for the target in the furthest bottom left of itself. So, for instance, I have two targets here, but if these are within range, then these will always be prioritized by the target without the target sorts set. And target actor. This will be, by default, you base target actor. This will be if you, for instance, want to have an fireball spell, then you want it to manually select a target you want to cast. But if you want to have an shield spell that you can only cast on yourself, then you do not want to select the spell and then target a caster. So you will be using instant target actor. This is immediately the moment you click on the spell, be it clicking it with a mouse or the hotkey, it will instantly trigger the ability. So the base target actor and instant target actor, these are the two parameters you will be primarily using. And target filter here. This will be so that you can only, for instance, be able to cast it onto enemies or allies. Or you can use tags to for instance, height plane air, for instance. You will not be able to cast it onto aerial targets, for instance. And the targeting type, this will be a location or unit. A location means that if I, for instance, target an area of effect spell on a unit, then if it moves, then the unit will still be going towards the target that I casted and cast it there. If I set this to unit, then I will not be able to cast it on the ground. I will need to cast it onto a unit, and if it moves, then it will keep the caster will pursue the target until it is within range. And location or unit. This will mean that if I can target it here to target the ground, but also if I target a caster and the caster on the target moves, then it would pursue the target instead of targeting on the ground. So that is what the hybrid alternative here means. And the tooltip here. This will be so that you can set the description of the spell when you hover over it on the command card to look what this spell does. You can manually type it here or in the button that I will showcase later. And now for an ResearchAbility. ResearchAbility is less of an ability and more of an collection of upgrades, a library, where you have a different sets of upgrades for heroes or for instance unit upgrades, or for instance hero upgrades such as leveling up abilities. And this is an example of command indexes that I showcased earlier in the units command list. The indexes 0, 1, 2, and 3 and so on. I will showcase this later in practice, so that I will showcase this better in practice so that you can see how this works later when I get into the trigger section. And now for the upgrade data, this is the actual this is where you give new effects onto units. And each of these upgrades are different upgrades for instance the Lancer, I believe, having two upgrades, or most spellcasters that has base upgrade and master upgrade. And here you have the name of the upgrades that you will see in the name of the upgrades that you will see when hovering over it in the command card, I believe. No, sorry, well, I think this is if you do not have anything in the button, then it will be defaulting to what is in the name. But the button here, this will be giving you this is where you will decide what ability icon the ability will have in a command card and description, I believe. And now for the unit modifiers. This is where you will be giving a broad upgrade for units, such as, for instance, if you upgrade this, then all of your units that has the tag biological will be receiving 0.5 more health regeneration. And you can set this to have multiple effects, such as including, for instance, having 0.5 movement speed for all units as well, if you so desire. And the research effect. This is a little bit more esoteric, but for instance, you can have on your hero units, you can have this upgrade to for instance the level up abilities or something. Then you can, for instance, have a small explosion when triggered, or a healing effect when this research is complete. And flags here, this means that you can share this upgrade with your entire team if you have one, if your game mode has something that has a collaborative element, where you decide to put your resources into upgrading. And you can have a create alert on complete. If you disable this, then I believe it will not be showcasing a small notification in a corner where when it is complete. But I believe if you untag it, then it will still be on the minimap. It will still be giving a small alert when this is completed. And research time, this will be how much time this will be needed to upgrade this respective. For instance, you can setting this to 30 seconds, then it will take 30 seconds, or 60 as it is usually expected from a structure, or you can have it to 0 if you want to level up abilities on heroes. And the resource cost, this will be how much it costs to upgrade that in order to use the ability. And you can also have the upgrade provide permanent supply boost for you as well. And I'll quick detour to Productionqueue. This by default has a showcase list because it by default only has 5, but you can create a new one to have, for instance, 10 or 20, or you can queue up 30 unit producing 30 units, for instance, if you so desire, with the Productionqueue. And for MorphAbility, this will be used to change one unit to another. Well, usually you will thinking about, for instance, the Atlas. You'll be thinking about the Atlas morphing, but the MorphAbility is also used for. It is also used for structures such as the grace node to change it to other structures. This will be using the command here to change what unit you want it to change to. So for instance, you want to upgrade a unit, for instance, or change a unit such as the Atlas back and forth, you will be using this. And you can have a requirement to, for instance, be needing an upgrade and having a cooldown for how often this can be used. And having this for how long of a time you want it to take. I think the Atlas has 2 or 3 seconds, and most structures has 10 or 30 seconds to morph. And you can using the target actor here, either instant target or morph target. Instant target means that the moment you use it, you will be starting the morphing, but morphing target, this will be, for instance, the new Atlas ability. You can use to target an area and the unit will walk somewhere, then morph it in that location. So that is the instant morph and instant target and a morph target. And an Unreal component here. This will be an animation for what the unit will be doing when you're in the process of the morphing duration. And as you can see here, here are a couple of abilities that are shared with the previous ones, such as, for instance, such a placement here. I believe this will be trying to cast it at the closest area where, for instance, the Atlas, if you accidentally cause it on cliff, then I believe it will be auto-correcting it to somewhere where you can use it in the nearby vicinity. And as I mentioned previously, for the cost of this you will be going into the units, the unit data's cost, and if the morphing target is higher, then the morphing ability will cost. If it's even, then it will cost nothing, and if the unit that you unit the structure that you're morphing on to cost less, then you'll be refunding resources. This will be for most abilities. You will be using this for abilities. Yes, you'll be determining the icon here, what you want it to look like. There is no preview alternative, so you just can have to guess yourself and try yourself, see what you like in the game. And the name here, this will usually be the name of the ability when you hover over it in the command card when you select an ability. And the tooltip here, this will be a further description of an ability. This will be, I'm just gonna clean on. This will be to some extent the same as the validator, except the parameter here can use. You will be creating on a logic here, which I believe almost exclusively is comprised of either do you have on structure, or do you have an upgrade. And I believe you will be most of the time using a logic parameter, an equal to and check. If you have an upgrade completed, or you're in a process of creating a unit, creating an upgrade. I will go a little bit further into this when you get into the triggers to show it in practice. And the distinction here is can use and can show. Can use means that in the command card you will be seeing the ability, but it will be locked, and you can clearly see that you cannot use it. And can show, this means that the ability will not be shown until the logic you've showcased is true. Meaning that you could, for instance, have an RPG system where you have a branching system, and the ability will not be shown on a hero's command card unless you've chosen the specific ability. Or upgrades, for instance, where you're upgrading to weapon tier 1, 2, and 3. So you can have this, the tier 2 will not be showcased until they've completed tier 1, for instance. And for the validator, this is basically the same, except it's more for abilities and weapons where a unit cannot attack something if it does not meet a unit cannot attack or use an ability on something unless it meets these criteria. Or for instance, if you're using a search area, you're casting an ability and you want it to only affect the units that has energy or does not have energy. So you can search area with a validator. So for instance, only units with energy would be affected, means that even if the worker here is in the search area, it will not be affected if you set the validator to so. And now for tag bonus. This will be and small, easier to apply damage bonuses to weapons or abilities, for instance. As you can see, it is straightforward. It will apply a bonus 5 damage if it is a light target, or if the entity is in structure, you will be dealing 150 additional damage. This is then you will be using a tag bonus. And responses. This will be if the, I believe this will be if the, primarily if the unit receives damage. Then, for instance, this is where, for instance, if the Lancer receives any damage, then it will be subtracting that damage by 2. Which can also be used if you are receiving damage, then you can, under certain conditions, receive reduced damage or increased reduced healing or increased healing. And for instance here, fatal means that you can, this means that the damage response, if the unit would have been killed, then you can negate all of that damage, for instance, and have this an ability with a cooldown, such as with extra units. This is how I believe this is used. And now for how to create a weapon. For the Unreal component here, I believe this will be this is for an animation. Most units will be using AC weapon generic. This will be the generic animation a unit will be having, but some units has a different animation for attacking air or for attacking ground. Or ground, for instance, such as the Incarnate that has an anti-air shooting from its back and its claw weapon that attacks ground. So but most of the time you will be using AC generic or air or ground. And if you and it will be, you can also set this to a turret, so this will be firing from the turret instead of turning instead of having the entire unit turning around. You can only have the weapon turning around to fire with that. And weapon fire, this will be the actual effect that will be fired. For instance, if you want to have a LaunchProjectile, then this will be used to having a LaunchProjectile sort of a effect, or you want to have just having a plain damage effect, then you will be using the effect will be fired from this parameter. And the icon, this will be for this will be what the weapons icon will be looking at when you select a unit and see the weapon next to the armor tag, next to the armor section when you hover over it. And for the flag here, the melee, this is a little bit complicated, but this is a little bit more complicated. But you can see in my video with showcasing how to create a dashing ability or projectile weapon, the dedicated video. I have showcased how details about this, but essentially this will mean that it will be determining the range based on how far you have to travel to it. It's really complicated that I'm not able to articulate, but If you want to see more into this, then I have a separate video showcasing this. And you can have an alternative to always visualize range, so that for instance you want to see how far the range of the attack range of an long range unit is, for instance, instead of guessing. Maybe you cover the entirety, maybe not. So you can have this to have a small ring around it. And attack location. This is for artillery units that does an area of attack damage in a location. So you can have an alternative to continuously attack a location without without needing a unit to be standing there. And for an channeled, this is for an persistent. This is for GameEffect persistent if you want the unit to have to channel, for instance, a life drain beam or something else, then you can have this to prematurely cancel the channeled persistent if you move with this unit. And fire passively. This is for if you want the unit to be able to fire a weapon even if the unit is moving, then this will be firing at the target. Such as, for instance, being able to firing a weapon with a turret where the turret is tracking the target even if the unit itself is moving. Then you can have fire passively. Can use. This means that if you have multiple units, then, for instance, this means that you can only use this if the target, I believe this is, if the target is a light unit, for instance, you can only use it against them. Or if you, for instance, you can only use this when you're stealthed, and the other units will be only usable if you're not stealthed. Then you can have two weapons, for instance, with using this can use. Cannot fire with flocked. This is for air units, I believe. This means that if you're gathering if you have a whole load of units clumped together and stutter stepping, then the unit will not be able to fire until they spread out a little bit. This is what the flocking means, that you cannot fire while the units are clumped up. And the weapon target filter. This I will believe is for instance will be, you can exclude air units, meaning that if this weapon will only be able to fire at ground targets or units that does not have an aerial unit tag. And for instance, if you want this to not be able to manually target allies or friendly units, for instance, then you can untag these out. And weapon acquire filter. I think this will be, if for instance you have this acquire, I believe this will be what targets the unit will be automatically be firing at, meaning that if this is an light unit, if this unit is an heavy, then I think that the unit will not be automatically be firing at the units that does not have the light tag, if it's, for instance, is a heavy unit. And an alternative here is ammunition. This will be if you want to have an hit and run unit that rapidly fires but only has a certain amount of ammunition, then you can tweak around with this. Or if you want to have an extreme case where the ammo will only be replenished by being near a certain structure, such as an ammo depot, for instance, then you can tweak around with the ammunition rune here. And an arc here, this will be if you want to have a structure that is turning around with its turret, for instance, or having a boss unit, then you can use an arc and arc stop, and similarly to how an ability uses it. And a range maximum and minimum. The range maximum will be how close you have to get to a target before you're able to fire, and range minimum to not be able to fire at targets, such as the Atlas units that has a minimum range where it cannot fire at targets. And range acquire. This is the aggro range of an unit. By default, in Stormgates, units does not have an aggro range of their own. This is entirely determined by their weapon. So, for instance, if I have a weapon range of 8 and a range acquire of 6, then I could potentially attack it from a greater range, but it will only be attacking units that are at a range of 6. Or I can have a weapon on a range acquire of 12 and a range of only 1, which is the case for most melee weapons. Then a melee unit will walk towards a unit at a range of 12 and only attack when it gets within a range of 1. And a range slop here. This will be once you've started an attack animation, then it will be having a small distance where if I start an attack animation and a unit is trying to escape, then it will be if the unit gets outside of the range slop, then before the animation is completed, then the weapon is cancelled. But if the weapon is complete, but the unit is between the maximum range and slop, then the weapon's attack will be completed. It will be successful. And the period here, this will be after every successful attack. This will be the period between when the weapon starts attacking again. So for instance, if I have a somewhat long weapon period, then after the weapon is complete, then it will be 3 seconds before I can start the attack again. But it should also be taken in consideration with the swing. The swing, once a melee unit, for instance, get within a range, then it is within a range, but it will start its swing. This is the swing, essentially the same as the casting time for an ability. So once it gets within a range, it starts attacking at 0.5. After 0.5 seconds, it will be attacking its target. Then it will be a 3 second cooldown before it can attack again, and then attack once again after 0.3 seconds. Meaning that effectively with this setup, you'll be having a 3.5 second cooldown total between every attack. And backswing, I think this is on some sort of animation. I believe this is an animation if, for instance, you have for instance, the EXO here. This unit has no swing, time, but it has an animation, meaning that the moment this unit stops, it fires its weapon, and so it can stutter step to quickly attack. But it will be having I believe it has a 0.5 second swing to still have an recoil animation. And the swing locked. This will be once the weapon, when a weapon swing, this is an alternative you can have to have a 2 second swing time, meaning that once the attack is complete, the unit will stand still for 2 seconds before it will be pursuing the target if the unit is trying to run away after you have completed a successful attack, in order to create a little bit more cinematic feeling. And here's a second last as well as a neat little thing: swing reacquisition range. If you're have multiple targets in the vicinity and you're attacking this target but it runs away, then if an other target is close enough, then the weapon will be failed at targeting this, but it will continue its attack and attack a separate nearby target instead. If you have multiple units attacking the same target, and if this target kills the target and this unit is in the middle of its swing, then it won't be redirecting its swing to this nearby unit if that was an enemy, for instance. So that is what reacquisition range. This is not just for melee units, but ranged units as well. Such as the Hellborn with its fancy attack that has it gathers a large fireball and fires at the target. If it is in the middle of its swing and the target here dies, then it will complete its swing and attack this target if that was an enemy. So that is what swing reacquisition range does. And the weapon name as well. If you want to have a name on the weapon when you hover over it in the command card next to the armor details. And ammo. I believe you have to set this up for weapons ammo. You have to set this up. You can set this up here for to get the details of, for instance, how much ammo the weapon starts with once the unit is created, and how much it can accumulate total, and how often you get a new ammunition, for instance. And now for the buffs. For buffs, these will be usually you will have for persistent long-range effects, such as stuns or healing over time or such. But most of the time the buff will be something that for something that you do not want to have an unit to channel onto another unit. And for the buff visual, this means that you will have an visual effect persistent glowing on a target, such as, for instance, if you have a lightning shield buff that you want to have to reflect damage on the target, then you can, for instance, have having sparkling lightning effects with the buff visual that will last so long as the buff is persistent. So long as the buff persists on the target. And the buff tags. This will have a couple of effects that you're looking for, such as for instance, if a unit is stunned or if an unit is silenced, then you will be applying this if an ability, for instance, is silenceable. And there are a couple of other things here, such as you temporarily wanted to have a heavier biological, for instance. There's only one, or if, for instance, you want to have an resilient to make it less susceptible to suppression. The only one is immobilized. I'm not sure why, but for some reason the immobilized tag will not work, but I will be showcasing on a workaround for this. So that is what tags does. And tags persistent. This means that I believe even if the tag is removed, then this will leave on the tags forever. So if you want to have something that persists beyond the buff being removed. And the buffs tags, this again will be the same as the tags, but this is for dispelling purposes. For instance, if this unit is marked as stunned or immobilized, then on a remove buff effect will be removing this buff if it matches those criteria. And remove tags. This will be, for instance, if you want to remove, if you want to temporarily remove resilient, for instance, you can use the remove tags here temporarily, or so long as the buff persists or forever. And now for the modifiers. This is where, for instance, you want to have, if you want the unit to temporarily be moving, having a greater movement speed, for instance, then you will be using the speed parameter here, or attack speed or the damage bonus, for instance, to have this dealing 20% more damage, or for instance having a 20% faster attack speed. Then you can use the modifier parameter here. And there is a couple of other parameters here that you can use with the modifier parameter. And you can have responses such as for instance the Lancer's reduce damage by 2, for instance, or you can have a buff that increases how much healing or suppresses how much healing you can receive, so long as you have the buff with the appropriate responses. And the state flags, not stacks, sorry, state flags. This will be, for instance, you will be having a temporary detector status that let you see invisible units, or temporarily stealthed, or you will be unable to control the unit, for instance. So this you can set to have temporarily with the state flag on the buff. And for the flags here, for instance, if you do not want the buff to be seen but still be on the unit, then you can have this here. So if you're selecting a unit, you will not be seeing it if you have a whole load of lot of esoteric buffs that are not necessarily important to be seen. And for instance, here this I believe will be if you want the unit to be unstarted temporarily when the unit is attacked, then you can for instance have this to if it is attacking or if it receives damage respectively, then you can have these, or to disable for instance health regeneration or energy regeneration if you go into combat. And you can have a timer on the buff, meaning that if you have a certain duration of the buff, and then this will be having a small bar that temporarily that goes down, the same as the casting bar. Or you can have a more extreme. This will be completely removed if you take or receive damage. If you deal or receive damage. And this is a little bit more. This is more for search parameters. That this is a little bit more complicated thing for dispelling or searching, which I think I've showcased in my buffing spells video. And you can have this persist undead if you, for instance, have an effect that causes the unit to deal damage around itself every couple of seconds. Then even if the unit is dead, then this will be persisting on its corpse so long as the corpse is persistent. And what is it? Duration here. If you want to have this only last for a couple of seconds, then you can have it so, for instance, a lightning shield that lasts only 10 seconds. But if you want to have a more persistent effect, then you can have this to -1 to last forever, meaning that it can only be removed manually with a remove buff or by some other criteria. And these are effects here. Effect in initial, this will be a game effect that a game effect such as healing or damage, for instance, that is applied the moment the unit receives this buff, or alternatively an refresh, meaning that whenever the unit receives this buff again, for instance, having an overcharge ability or something, if you want to have an overcharge ability, it will receive damage if you buff it, if you apply it before the duration is completed or it is removed. And the effect expire here. This will transpire once the buff has lasted its entire duration, if it has a limited duration. Or you can use final here. This will mean that if the duration runs out or the buff is removed, then you can have a final effect we applied here on the unit. But the most relevant one here will be effect periodic. This means that so long as the buff is active, then this will be repeatedly running an effect on the unit on a regular basis, which is dictated by a periodic duration. So, for instance, every 0.5 seconds, I will be having a DamageRadius effect that deals damage around the unit with the buff, or some other thing, such as for instance having this being a damage over time debuff. So every 3 seconds you receive a 10 or 20 damage effect, for instance. And stacks here. This I believe will only be relevant for the periodic, and I think this only affects the periodic here. But this will be, for instance, you can having this stacking up to 3 times to cause 3 times the damage over time effect at every periodic tick, and you can have this to every time the duration expires. For instance, you can have this only losing 1 of 1 stack. So for instance, you're setting this up to initially start with 5, then every time it expires, then it will gradually become less and less potent, potent effect, I believe. And for the validator parameters here, if for instance you want to have it, you can have this to having a validator, meaning that this will only be, you can only have this on a unit that has 50% or more hit point, then it would either be removed or disabled. So then you can set this here, or you can have this having a healing effect where only if the unit has it will only be enabled if you have 50% or less hit point, to have an emergency healing effect. Height here. This is something that you should not touch. At the very least, the last time I tried to use it, this will cause the editor to crash and freeze the editor, and you will potentially lose things that you've edited. This should in theory have been to raise the units lower and raise and lower the unit's height to, for instance, raise it above the ground. But at the very least, the last time I tried to use it, then this did not work. You can check it if it has been patched or not, but at the very least be warned about the height parameter here. And the icon here, when you select a unit, you will be seeing the buff in the corner. This will be dictating what icon the buff will be having, and also the name that it will be having as well, and the tooltip, what the further description of the buff, what description the buff will have. And for ApplyBuff, this as the name implies, will be putting on respective buff on the target with this parameter here. And as you might expect, it will be usually you will be applying onto the target. But you can also use this to the caster if you if you're having GameEffects set to have multiple effects. And impact effects, this will be when you apply the buff, then this will have an initial graphical effect that will be used. And you can have a validator here. So for instance, if you have a spell that uses apply buff to set buffs or debuffs on the target, then you can use this to dictate if it is possible or not. And the stacks here, for instance, if you want to have something that sets an auto casting ability that sets one or two stacks at a time on the target, for instance, for a damage over time or healing over time effect, then you can use stacks here if the buff itself has the option to be stacked. And buff remove buff. This will largely be the same, except it has an source parameter here. This means that for instance, if I set this to source unit, then if an unit casts remove buff, it will only be removing buffs that it itself has applied onto a target, including itself, if that is the case. GameEffects set. Let me create a new one. A GameEffects set. This will be used if you have something that you want to have multiple things occur on a target, such as for instance on LaunchProjectile, where on impact you want it to deal damage, but you also want to leave an debuff on the target. Then you will be using this on the LaunchProjectile's impact effect, and it will be having, this will be having on the target or caster, for instance. But most of the time you will be using target for this. But that this again is up to you. Or if you want to have a caster, StagedAbility's cast effect, then you can use this to have multiple things occur at the same time. And having an impact effects for a graphical effect on the target if you so want to. And then Validator is also an option. And now for a little bit more complicated thing on Switch. This is a more computer programming computer programming territory thing. This will be going through validators here to try and apply one of many things. For instance, I can check this if it has a validator to check if the buff has 5 stacks or something, then it will be performing a game effect such as for instance a damage effect, or I can have if it only has 3 stacks of the same buff, or if it does not have 5 stacks, it will check the next parameter. Then for instance, if it has 3 stacks of the previous buff, it will have a smaller damage effect. And if it only has 1 stack, for instance, it will have a really mild damage effect, for instance, an alternative effect. And if all of these fails, then you can perform a default action. So this is for the people that has a programming experience, that this is essentially an if else condition thing, where the first thing that is true will be launched, or you can have an optional default action. And it has a validator here, and if you want this to be possible to be launched at all on the target and on target, of course, if you want to have this on a target or the casting unit. And the SearchRadius. You have 3 SearchRadius there. This is for instance, if you want to have a spell that buffs multiple targets in an area, then you can set this to have an radius of 5, for instance, which will search for a radius of 5 around an epicenter. It will be looking for targets, which then will be applying an game effect here onto a target. For instance, an apply buff or damage or whatever else you want to apply in the game effect you want to apply here. And with an alternative, if you do not find any eligible targets, then you can have an backup effect, such as backfiring onto the caster, for instance, if you do not find any target. And you can have here max target, for instance. I only want to be targeting 3 targets, so if I do it in center here, then only 3 targets will be selected. And here is a target sort again. If, for instance, you want to prioritize the closest targets first, so then only the 3 first targets will be hit in center here, and this will be excluded. Or you can use any of the other alternatives if you so desire. And again, if you do not have a target sort, then it will be prioritizing the targets furthest in the bottom left corner of the search areas parameter. And here you can have a target filter, for instance, only search friendlies or only search enemies if you so desire. Or you can have tags to exclude or require height, plane, ground and air, for instance, or light and heavy targets. And an impact effects, this is something that will be launched in the center of the targets, not onto each target that are affected, but only in the center. And the search location here, this usually you will be using the target, which will be where either if you, for instance, have a weapon, for instance, or an ability, then this will be on the center of the target. But you can set it onto if, for instance, this was the caster or the weapon user, even if they fire the weapon, then it will be the search radius will be going off in the center if you set this as the caster. And this is again a little bit more esoteric things for Instigator. This is more for game persistent, which I will be going into later. And the validator here. This will not be checking. Well, if you use this, for instance, as a spell on the ground, then this will not be checking individual units. It will only be, for instance, if you have, for instance, have 50% or less hit point, this will require you to have 50% hit point or less. Then this will stop it. But this will also be if you have this on a weapon, for instance, then this will not be able to be used on an unit that does not meet the validator parameter. If you, for instance, have an damage effect, then this will be if you have a validator on a damage effect, for instance, and you do a search area, then the search area will affect everyone, but the next step, the damage will be excluding for instance, if you cannot damage, if the damage parameter does not have a validator that does not affect units with energy, then only these two will be targeted, even if all three are affected by a search radius. So the validator here, this is for the entirety of the search radius, all or nothing. And the next step, the GameEffects respective validator will be determining if units that are affected, if the units that are valid through the filter, then the GameEffect will have their own check their own validator there. And search cone here, for instance. This will largely be the same, but this will be in an, as the name implies, this will be in a cone. So for instance, if I have a cone of 20, then I can do a search radius outside of here to only affect these two targets. Well, this one is unaffected. And the same is for quad. I think this is, at the very least, I think this is a square. Yeah, I believe this is a square search, with the search radius being a circle. And now for the damage. Damage is largely straightforward. You will having I'll create a demonstration. So here, for instance, you want an effect to deal 5 damage, then this will deal 5 damage. For a weapon ability, for an buff's periodic ticks, then this will deal 5 or 7 or whichever amount you so desire. And impact effects, this will be an graphical effect that will be played when the damage effect is applied onto a target. And you can have an ragdoll here as well. A chance to, I am not sure, quite frankly, if this requires the damage to kill the target or not. But at the very least, this will be, you can set this here to how far the damage will launch the unit when it's affected by this. But I think this could also be needing the damage to deal killing blow damage to the target. And a data type here. This will be for some special animation where the unit is burning up, or if it slowly vanishes, for instance, or having others. And I think either remove that or none. One of these, I believe, will be causes the unit to remove its on unit's death animation, and just causes it to quickly vanish immediately. And for flanks, for alert here, this will be, for instance, if you have an buff that deals damage over 30 seconds, you do not want every 3 seconds to have received the alert, I'm taking damage. So if you have this on a buff's damage over time effect, then you can remove the alert here. And the damage response here. This will again be if you have a damage over time effect, then you do not want for the entirety of the duration the unit to be trying to track down the target. That if, for instance, I have this caster here, cast a damage over time effect over 30 seconds, and I run away, then I do not want the unit here to, every time it takes damage, trying to chase the target every 3 seconds it receives damage. So I can remove a damage response here. And effect target. Most of the time you will be using this on a target, this being of the weapon target of a weapon that you're firing at, or an ability, but you can use this on yourself or a caster as well. And tag bonus. Here you can for instance be giving a bonus to structure, bonus to light, or you can have on negative values if you so desire, with an tag bonus type. And on a friendly fire parameter, if for instance you're dealing area of effect damage, or you want to be able to target friendlies, then you can adjust the percentage of how much friendly fire this will be dealing. If you have a friendly fire filter enabled on the effect. And vitals leech, this will be so that you can, for instance, have a vampiric effect or restore energy when you're dealing in this damage amount. And damage tags, this is for special effects such as for instance, if you have a buff or something else that reduces damage, if this is against a buff, for instance, that reduces melee damage taken, then you can set this parameter here to the GameEffect damages GameEffect damages damage tag to melee, so that or ranged, so that targets with a buff receives more or less damage from this specific damage type. And then validator. So for instance, if you want this to not be eligible to under certain conditions, such as if you have a buff called ethereal or something else, or transparent, then you will, for instance, you will not be able to use this as with a weapon. If you have this on a weapon, then the weapon cannot fire on targets that are ethereal, for instance, if you set the validator parameter here. Or for instance, for a search area, if you want to only exclude certain types of units, then if you want to have exclude certain units with buffs, then you can have a search area, and the damage parameter here will further filter out targets that will not be affected. And a damage radius here as well. This will be the same as the damage, except you do not need an search radius. So this will be and I'll quickly go and create a new demonstration. This will be about the same as an search radius, except it has one fancy thing here. for instance, I want to deal 100 damage. No, wait, so 50 damage, and in the center of the damage, at a radius of 2, I want to deal 1. This will be dealing 100 per damage fraction. This will be dealing 100%, meaning 50 damage. And from a range of 4 from the center, I only want to deal half the damage, meaning 25 damage. And furthermore, on a range of 6 to only 25, this will be to 12.5 damage. 12.5 damage. So I can having for instance on small nuke here with that deals expanding damage, but less as this expands. So this will be a handy distinction between having to create 3 separate creating separate search radiuses. The only somewhat negative thing is that this will not be does not have the same validator. This is an all or nothing validator. If, for instance, I'm using it on a target, then this will be an all or nothing. All targets that meets the search filter will be affected. So it has a little bit less. So it has a little bit less fine-tuning abilities to filter out targets, but at the very least, now you know about the DamageRadius effect. And GameEffectKill. This is essentially the same as the damage effect, except in the reverse, where it heals an amount to a target. And ModifyVitals. This is essentially to somewhat extent the same as a damage or healing effect, except you can have affect the energy as well. So you can, for instance, provide 5 or 10 energy to a target whenever this is applied onto a target. So for instance, you have a buff that goes off once every 2 seconds, providing 3 energy every 2 seconds, for instance. Then you can use ModifyVitals to provide or subtract energy. And resource. GrantResources. This will be for refunding. This will be providing resources to a player. Resource A being Luminite and resource B being Ethereum. So for instance, then you can for instance have GrantResources as an revenge parameter on a unit. Then once you kill a unit in a tower defense, then that unit will be, for instance, be providing 5 Luminite when it dies to you. And on persistent. And GameEffects persistent. This is largely the same as an buff, except this would be used for weapons and abilities. For instance, to channel, having channeling and life drain, for instance. And Unreal Actor here, I believe that this is something that you can use to have a channel and beam between 2 targets, for instance, or having for instance having a persistent effect such as an lightning shield on a target, then you can have a lightning spark that is consistently going on the target affected by the persistent. And the flag here, this again you will be needing an unchanneled in order to be used with an weapon or an ability, if you want to channel weapon or abilities. And a attack speed, if the unit has an weapon attack speed modifier, then this will either the persistent will either go slower or quicker. And a periodic here, this will be the same as the buff's periodic count, with some other additional parameters. I have made another video to go into greater detail if you want to see this, and an offset as well. I do not have the articulation skills to properly describe this with words, so it will be easier to see the video that showcases these things, but these have very interesting things that you can use them with. And GameEffectKill. This is used to instantly kill a target guaranteed, instead of having to rely on dealing a million damage or something. And it has you can set a death animation of the target if you so desire, and if needed, a small particle effect and Validator as well if you so want to. I have several videos on the channel that showcases how to create custom spells and weapons, so if you want to see examples. And now onto creating a tower defense map. That's it for this video. Coming up will be the tower defense section. Again, if you want any clarification, have any requests or questions, feel free to comment so in the comment section below. Stay intact and have a nice day.